take it away.
Late yesterday afternoon, we filed a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles and Chief Moore, as well as Doe defendants on behalf of Fahren James. And it's Doe defendants because at this point, we're unaware of which officers in particular assaulted Miss James. And I want to introduce you to Fahren. She's going to tell you her story, and then I'll have some follow-up remarks. Fahren James, like so many people, took to the streets in exercise of her First Amendment rights last summer. And she was out there to exercise a right that is most precious to us, our First Amendment right to free speech, to peaceably assemble. And while in the streets, she was ambushed and viciously attacked by Los Angeles Police Department officers, sending her to the hospital. And Fahren James is someone who is committed to this cause. She's continued to exercise her right in South Pasadena. She really is a profile in courage for someone who went through what she did and is still out there trying to make a difference and make this not a moment, but a movement where we are going to affect change in how policing is done, both in Los Angeles, throughout the country. So Fahren, if you could take it away and explain why you were out there that day and what happened to you.
Hi, and thanks for holding this conference. The Wednesday before the protest, I witnessed George Floyd's life being sucked out of him under the knee of Derek Chauvin and multiple other officers. This was not only a gut check, this was something that was personal to me. And it was personal to me because I viewed George as possibly one of my brothers, my father, somebody who was not deserving of this. Any other Black man. And I felt like there was no way that I could just sit home and process that. That Wednesday, I didn't go to work. That Thursday, I didn't go to work. That Friday, I was still in tears. Every morning I woke up watching the news, looking for justice, looking for an arrest, looking for accountability. And every morning I soaked in the fact that that wasn't achieved. I thought it was very obvious that the officers that murdered George Floyd needed to be prosecuted. And just staying home alone day after day after day, just soaking in this was just something that I couldn't do any longer. I wanted to take to the streets. I wanted to go with the people and stand with the people that were vocal about police brutality in this nation and about, how police have continued to over-police and underserve us in multiple different ways. So I took out to the streets that day. I believe we were there because we all wanted to speak on the fact that we wanted the same quality of life that white America is afforded. We wanted to have the same peace of mind that white Americans have when they encounter the police. We don't have that view or that idea that when we encounter the police, everything is going to be fair. We wanted the same patience and courtesy and the same respect afforded to those Americans that don't look at police brutality in the ways that we do, because we experience it in a different way. I particularly wanted to be there to protest the fact that police are using excessive and unnecessary force because they can, not because they have to, but because they can. We want our lives to matter. We want equal protection, and we just wanted to exercise our First Amendment rights afforded by this Constitution to speak out against these things. Um, I was only there about 30, maybe 40 minutes before I was assaulted by the police. Um, and what's more off-putting is the fact that I tried to have a dialogue with one of the officers there. Um, I spoke to an officer about de-escalation. I asked him because once they came out of the building, which was the studio on Beverly Boulevard, they came out firing multiple different types of ammunition and rounds into the crowd. When that happened, I fled to the sidewalk and I assumed that I was out of harm's way. However, I looked over to the police line and I noticed that there was an officer that was pointing his weapon directly towards me. And I engaged him in a conversation. I asked him, why are you pointing this weapon at me? I was approximately 10 to 15 feet away from him. At that time, there was nothing going on in the crowd. Nobody was threatening the police whatsoever. So I didn't really understand why there is a few cops that were still standing there with their weapons pointed towards civilians that were simply protesting versus people. When I engaged that officer and asked him why he was pointing his weapon at me, he explained to me that I'm not pointing at you, I'm pointing at the people behind you. These people were 30 to 40 feet away from me. So I continued the dialogue and I explained to him that these are the issues. And those issues are that police don't know how to de-escalate once a situation has been managed and is under control and there's no longer a threat. Eventually, that officer repositioned his weapon and moved to another area. At that point, I felt like I was a little bit safer than I was before when I had a gun pointed towards me. I was mistaken at that point. What happened afterwards is I began speaking to the people that were standing next to me. The majority of the people that were closest to me were people that were simply just taking pictures and trying to record what was happening at that time. After the cop repositions himself so that he was not pointing his gun at me, again, I was speaking to the people that were next to me. I turned around to look at the crowd. And then shortly after, even after having a conversation with these officers, and they were well aware that I was not a threat and that I was just simply trying to, one, exercise my First Amendment rights, and then also to kind of get them to think about what they were doing. I was jammed in the back with a baton. And after that, 2 shots followed, close range, one lodging into my stomach and then the other into my arm. I was in total dismay. I could not believe what had just happened to me. I could not believe what was happening to the people around me as we were standing there. People were getting shot with their hands up, as did I, with no provocation. After that, we asked the police, or multiple people asked the police to contact medical support, the ambulance, to render first aid as I was bleeding from my stomach. The police ignored those calls. It was only thanks to civilians that I had not known prior that helped me to safety and that helped me into a random car of women that wound up taking me to the hospital. I spent 3 days in the hospital. Last week, we saw what paled in comparison to what we experienced being peaceful as people stormed the Capitol. This was not only a gut check for me, this was something that re-traumatized me, that made me reflect back on that day, reflect back on how forceful the police force was, and for the life-changing experience that I went through that day. I'm sorry. We were there because we recognized a problem in the system, an inherent problem in the system. And I don't feel like this was just done as protocol. This was by design to silence us, to rid us of our ability to exercise our First Amendment rights. This was our police department and our forces taking our fight for accountability personal. It's really hard for me to try to gather all of my thoughts in this moment. I've tried for the last couple of days to try to write down some thoughts and some notes about this, but I have been in such a bad place this last week after watching what happened to the Capitol and seeing these people storm the Capitol in an attempt to invalidate our democratic process. I'm overwhelmed with disappointment in our system. And I just feel that without our local officials doing the work to interrupt the violence that has been perpetrated against protesters, it's just unbelievable. It is unbelievable what I am witnessing and what I'm seeing right now. Every day I have to wake up and look at scarring and feel the pain and discomfort of scar tissue. And just really having to process this on a day-to-day basis has been extremely difficult. I believe that during this time, we all have to take accountability and be responsible for our actions. But this isn't just limited to us. I believe our police departments and our captains and our government also has to take responsibility for the things that have occurred since the summer. I feel like we are in a place where in one breath we have hope, and then the next breath there's despair. And I'm just trying to really be positive about our future here in America. And it's really hard. It's something that is extremely hard to do when we have a lack of accountability within our police force, within our government. I'm not the only one that has experienced this type of brutality from police. There have been many other activists, allies, and citizens that have experienced the same type of brutality.
Thank you, Fahren. I can promise you that through your lawsuit and the lawsuit of so many others that have experienced similar situations, that we'll do everything to achieve justice on your behalf. I think everyone can see the pain that Fahren is experiencing as a result of our very own police department, the Los Angeles Police Department, that's sworn to protect and serve. They ambushed her that day, and you have the photographs, the permanent scarring on her stomach. This is something that will cause her pain for the rest of her life. And she's absolutely right. We have a First Amendment right to peaceably protest in our streets that the Los Angeles Police Department should be protecting. And Fahren was driven to go out there because of what happened in Minneapolis. But we have the same issues here in Los Angeles. We have the same issues here in Los Angeles. I represented the family of Brendan Glenn in 2015, who was shot in the back when he was unarmed. And Chief Beck called for his prosecution. It's more than 5 years later. The officer who shot that video where there was no reason to shoot him, he hasn't been prosecuted. We're thankful that George Gascon has been elected as district attorney and can look at that case. But we call upon George Gascon to look at these cases, because the officer that sat 3 to 5 feet away from Fahren James and shot her at point blank range and put a hole in her stomach with rubber bullets. We don't know if they're rubber. There's metallic fragments. They're not rubber. They're called rubber bullets. That officer deserves to be prosecuted under the law. Now, the lawsuit we filed is a civil lawsuit. We filed it in state court because under our Bain Civil Rights Act, if a person, an officer, uses threats, intimidation, coercion, or violence to deprive someone of their rights under our federal constitution, they're liable to that person for damages. And that's exactly what happened here. Farron's absolutely right. This was done to get people out of the streets, even where they were peaceably protesting. And we saw recently the LA Times covered another case of mine in which an officer was promoted within weeks of being found to have used excessive force and violate Daniel Garza's constitutional rights. So what kind of message is that sending to the police department of the Los Angeles Police Department if an officer is promoted when he's used excessive force? And so there's a history here. There's a history of peaceful protest. In 2000, you had the Democratic National Convention. In 2007, you had the May Day situation where the LAPD attacked people in the streets, shot out eyes, caused damage, and our city paid millions of dollars in settlements to those individuals. The amount of people hurt in those situations pales in comparison to all the people that were injured in the Black Lives Matter protests in Los Angeles at a time when we're facing a fiscal crisis and police officers going to be laid off. The city of Los Angeles faces a monumental liability concern because of what happened to Fahren James and other individuals. And we don't want to just stop at the individual officer who pulled the trigger twice We don't want to just stop at the individual officer who hit Fahren James with a baton when her back was turned and she was peacefully protesting. Who made the decision within the Los Angeles Police Department that they could shoot indiscriminately into a crowd with rubber bullets when people are peaceably protesting? That is reckless. That is outrageous. And that is against the law. As a city, we can do better. And we, through the filing of this civil lawsuit in conjunction with other civil rights lawyers, it has to stop. We have to put an end to this type of policing that punishes those who are speaking out. And make no mistake about it, the reason why the LAPD was so vicious against people like Fahren James, an African-American woman who was called to be in the street rather than work at her job because of the injustice she saw with George Floyd, is because they're speaking out, and we're speaking out against police brutality. That is not an anti-police view. That is not anti-police. All police officers should be against police brutality. It's not serving and protecting. And so when you look at the cost economically, it's going to be devastating for our city. But the human cost is even more. The physical pain, the emotional agony, the denial of human dignity. The fact that people were protesting for Black Lives Matter somehow made the LAPD look at those individuals as less than human. Less than human. There's an old police phrase for this, NHI, no human involvement, that referred to African Americans. That was used in the police force in the 90s. They might not use that code anymore, but if you look at the photos, if you could call up a screen share, Jasmine, a couple of the photos of Fahren that day and they to her that day. You can't shoot a gun 3 feet away at a human being who's unarmed and cause that type of damage to their stomach, to their arm, without somehow considering that person is less than human, less dignity as a human being. And this is just reprehensible. Thank you, Jasmine. This is just reprehensible that our Los Angeles Police Department did this to so many individuals who posed absolutely no threat to the police department. And it's a new day in our country. We're going to have a new administration. There's going to be some reform done. And it's a new day in Los Angeles with a new district attorney who ran on the platform of police reform. Well, we are gratified that he's going to be looking at the 5-year-old case of Brendan Glenn and other cases. But this situation with how peaceful protesters needs to be looked at within the city of Los Angeles to make sure that it never happens again. If we're here demanding accountability in Washington, D.C., and we're demanding accountability in Minneapolis and Louisville, we need accountability and justice in the city of Los Angeles. We demand that the Constitution of the United States, the bedrock of our nation, be respected. We have a Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. When you shoot a person from 3 feet away when they're unarmed and not engaged in any criminal conduct, that's a violation of the United States Constitution. It violates the First Amendment and it violates the Fourth Amendment. We also have a Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial. And the reason I'm filing these cases in state court on behalf of Ms. James and other people is because we intend to take this case in front of a jury. A jury is the conscience of our community. They will determine how we're going to make the streets safe for individuals to speak their mind when important issues come up. And we filed a state court lawsuit to explain those allegations. I mean, there is a powerful movement across the country right now to affect change. And here, peaceful protesters were protesting police brutality and police murder. And what were they met with? More police brutality. So we filed this lawsuit not only to protect Fahren James, to protect all of us. We want to find out who is responsible for the orders to approve the police shooting at crowds with rubber bullets at unarmed peaceful protesters. And when we find the answers to those questions, we intend to be part of the solution. We could do better in the city of Los Angeles to make sure that people aren't hurt in the streets. Fahren James's life will never be the same. It will never be the same. She will never forget that day. And we look forward to a day when we could work with the police department in the city of Los Angeles and protect all of our communities. And we look forward to achieving justice for Fahren James. Thank you.
Thank you. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and we'll take questions right now. For folks who joined late, if you check the chat, there's a link for you to download the photos and videos and a copy of the lawsuit related to this case. And I'll see going once, going twice. Okay, one moment. Okay, Bertram, where are you from and what's your question?
Yeah, hi, I'm Bertram from the LA Sentinel newspaper. Where were you protesting at? Was it downtown or where?
Let me unmute her. Okay, there we go.
I was on Beverly, right outside of the station between the Aeron grocery store and the studio on Beverly Boulevard.
To be specific,
these are the
CBS studio on Beverly Boulevard near Erewhon.
and the date.
I don't know, did someone say something? Did you say something else, Bertram?
Someone asked what.
Am I still on?
Yeah, you're still on.
Oh, no, I don't have any more further questions right now.
Okay. Tell
Yeah,
Brandon
sorry.
hi.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll do.
All right. Oh, we have Darlene Dunlow with us. Hey, Darlene, how are you? You should be able to speak now. Darlene.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hey, girl.
Okay. I wanted to ask, what is Miss James' profession? She said she's had to stay home from work several days. From what job does she have to stay home? And also, how has she been taking care of herself in the months since this happened?
Go ahead, Fahren.
I am an in-home technician, so I go into people's homes regularly. That is my job. As far as what I've done since then to try to, it sounds like this question was more about self-care. For me, it was important to get back into the streets. I know many people would have likely been discouraged after experiencing what I did, what I experienced and be in the hospital for 3 days. But it was more important for this fight to continue and for me to be a part of that. So it was just hard for me to stay home, even after getting out of the hospital, because there was still so much going on. So what we did is we actually started a local demonstration here in South Pasadena, where me and my brother have organized peaceful protest. I know this may sound a little odd, but continuing the fight was part of my healing process. It was therapeutic for me in some ways. And I will say that after doing that all summer long, it also brought additional pain and hardships. And as incidents occurred, even with my local police here in South Pasadena. But that's what I did. I continued to be vocal, and I organized in my local city to bring in more people in the community um, to understand what the movement was about. Because as we know, on some outlets, we were looked upon very negatively. And I wanted to show exactly what this protest was about, that it was peaceful and that it was all about accountability. It was all about recognizing and breaking down systemic racism as well. So that is what I did following um, the encounter with the police on May 30th.
Anything else, Darlene?
Ask, was this your first formal, well, not formal, was this your first protest ever, or had you protested before?
My first protest was for Trayvon Martin um, many years ago. And I marched downtown um, with other organizers and activists and people that were just, in complete disbelief of how justice was not served on his behalf either. So that was my first protest. This was my first organizing and leading a protest this summer following being shot by the police.
And just one last thing, what is it that you would like to happen to the officers?
I believe all of this is about appealing to the consciousness of Americans and also our police force. What I'd like to see happen is I like to see them being held accountable, them streets. I want to see the people that ordered this kind of response to be held accountable as well. None of us should have been met with that type of force that day. And as we see, there are alternatives to this type of policing. Use of force should not be the first method to de-escalate any situation. And it just disturbs me that these officers go through so much training, and the only results we see from these trainings or from their training is use of force. And I don't understand how officers are not being held accountable for violating their the very oath that they swore when coming into policing.
I will add, we cooperated with the city of Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles is investigating these. And I've made the decision, even though our clients aren't obligated to speak, but to meet with the city of Los Angeles investigators. And Fahren is given a tape recorded statement and explained every detail and answered every question that was asked. And there's body cams. I've been in touch with the city attorney's office on other cases. They know who these officers are. It will come to light. And we absolutely want to see accountability for these officers in terms of what the LAPD process is. We're not going to make any pronouncements of what that should be, but there has to be accountability. And in these cases where it was so blatant on a one-on-one situation, the use of force against Fahren James, I truly believe the criminal charges should be filed against those officers.
Thank you. Eric Fabro, where are you from and what's your question?
Hi, Eric Fabro. I work with the local newspaper, the South Pasadena News. This question is directed to the entire panel, whoever can answer it. As mentioned before, there are a lot of civil rights cases being filed against officers or the sheriff's department. Do we have like a rough figure of how many cases are being filed right now similar to Fahren's, or are there any other high profile cases similar to Fahren's that we know of.
I guess, unless you know the answer to that, I should take that. I mean, look, we don't have the absolute number. I think more and more are going to be filed. I know I represent approximately 15 people who were injured in these protests, who were shot at or received injuries otherwise. And there are many lawyers across the city that do the type of work that we do, that are representing individuals. So I think the tally will have to come, in the coming months. And there's also a class action suit where we're seeking injunctive relief. This lawsuit is separate from that because I made the determination. What's happened in the past is you have a class action suit and the class action case settles, and then it's our taxpayers' money, and then it's business as usual. Each of the individuals who've been harmed by the LAPD has a story. Each of them has a story, and their story should be heard. And we appreciate people covering it here, but we want their stories to be heard in a court of law so that ultimate justice can be gotten in terms of a verdict to tell the city of Los Angeles no more.
Yes. Anything?
Excellent. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. No, that was a great answer. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric.
I also dropped in the chat for you, Eric, a link to another Black Lives Matter activist who was shot, and it's a pretty high profile case as well here in LA. So just to give you reference. Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Going once, going twice, because if there are not, we are going to wrap this press conference. Any other questions? All right, great. So reporters, you can hit me up via email or my phone if you need anything. If you didn't, click the link in the chat for the photos and the videos and a copy of the lawsuit. Make sure you do that. If you don't get a chance to, don't worry, I can send it to you as well. Other than that, we appreciate you for covering this and listening to Ms. James's story, which is very, very important. So thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.